realestatewebinar.com. I hope everyone is having an awesome evening. I want to thank everybody for attending tonight's Should You Create an Entity webinar. And I'm super excited to have on the call tonight a very special guest, a personal friend of mine and my own personal attorney, Matthew Owens. And I first want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and make sure you grab a pen and a pad because there's going to be a ton of great information given out. So tonight's webinar is on one of the most common topics I get when meeting with new real estate investors, and to be quite honest with you, even seasoned investors. And that topic is whether or not to form an entity, whether it be an LLC or a corporation, whether or not to form an entity to buy real estate in. You know, if I look back to when I got started in 1999, I was completely uneducated on this topic and just didn't really know where to go. I didn't know whether I should start a company or just do it as a sole proprietor. But after speaking with a bunch of people, I ultimately determined that it was a good idea to start a company, but I needed to know what type of company to start. Should I do an LLC, an S corporation, a C corporation, a partnership? I just didn't know. It was really confusing. And as we all know, attorneys are not cheap. So I ended up starting an LLC, but I paid dearly for it. I don't remember the exact cost, but I know for a fact it was at least $2,000. It might have even ranged up in that $3,000 price point. So I want to do a few little housekeeping issues first. Ryan's on the call with us tonight, Calhoun from PA Deals. And Ryan, if you could just tell everybody, I'm sure there's going to be some questions throughout the evening. If you could just tell everybody how they can ask questions while we're talking, and then as they become relevant, I will pose those questions to Matt.
Right. You'll see there's a toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. As you would think of a question or as we're going through the presentation, it's just simple type in text in there and then hit send, and that will arrive to both Zach and I, and then Zach will ask the question when he can fit it in or when we will get to Q&A at the end of the presentation. So very simple, just text in the right-hand side and then press send.
Cool. And I'm going to put one of my favorite people on the spot quick to make sure everybody can hear us and that the question forum is working. So Rose Bruce, I know you're on the call. If you can hear me and you get this instruction, if you could please type in a question real quick, just so I can make sure that someone just did a question. Very cool. All right, well, I guess it's working. Awesome. All right, guys, so here's the deal. We're going to talk about should you create an entity to buy real estate in. If we determine you should, we're going to talk about which one is best for you, and then we're going to tell you how to go about setting up an entity. So, again, Matthew Owens from Owens, Barkavage, and McEnroy is on the call tonight. Matt's been my attorney for many years, and I've come to know him really as a top-notch attorney who really knows his stuff. The coolest part about Matt is he's not only a knowledgeable attorney, but he's a super savvy real estate investor. In fact, Matt and I were just talking the other day. He used to own over 100 houses and apartments identical to what types of properties we all own. Single-family houses, apartment buildings, row homes, townhomes. He owned it all. At this point in his career, he's slowed down a little bit. He's sold off the portfolio, and he's gotten into more commercial deals. But he's still a very active real estate investor. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Matt Owens to the crowd tonight. And Matt, if you could just tell everyone a little bit about yourself, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Zach. Good evening, everybody. As Zach said, I'm Matt Owens, and I am an attorney. My legal background is when I graduated from law school, I went to work for a small firm in Harrisburg. I was there for about a year. Did a lot of civil litigation, some real estate, some corporate work, some criminal defense work too as well, and then became a lawyer for a very large Philadelphia law firm, 500-plus lawyers. I was at that firm, became a partner there, and worked there for about 12 years. Ended up having my own staff, which made me have some extra time on my hands, and I was always intrigued by real estate. So while I was at this firm, I started to accumulate residential real estate. It worked phenomenally well for me. I I got to the point where I did start to make a transition into commercial real estate. And it was a few years after that that I decided the big partnership was no longer for me, and I started my own firm. I started my own firm in 2009, started really with just myself, and I have 7 attorneys now. Each attorney specializes in their own practice area. I primarily do business law, corporations, and real estate, of course. And as Zack indicated, my clients come to me for a number of reasons, but the most important are I'm a pretty good attorney when it comes to real estate because I have the battle scars to prove it. I'm also a real estate investor, as Zack said. So I have made the transition into commercial, took on a partner a number of years ago, and as we accumulated the residential, he was operating a construction company. I was practicing law, and the apartments became a bit labor-intensive when you had that number. We just didn't have the staff for that kind of work, and so we started to transition from residential into commercial. We grew rather quickly in the commercial, probably approached around 500,000 square feet. I've sold some of those buildings. We're now we have 10 buildings, probably about 300,000 square feet, and things are going great. I am a proponent of residential real estate. It enabled me to get to where I am, and a proponent of commercial real estate as well. So this talk tonight, Zack, I think helps across the board for anybody who wants to invest in any kind of real estate. So hopefully that gives you the background.
It's perfect, and guys, I just hope you realize what caliber of person we're talking with this evening. He did everything that we're doing today. I've got, currently myself 48 units. I know a lot of you on the call have 2, 3, some people maybe larger portfolios to the tune around 10 properties or 15. But Matt's lived it. He's experienced the good and bad of this business, and he's lived to survive it. So, okay, let's jump right into the presentation. Matt, first question: does it make sense for all real estate investors, new, seasoned, young, or old, to create entities to buy real estate in? And if so, why?
I would say in 95% of the cases, yes. I'll talk first, because it's quick, on the individuals that probably don't need to consider forming an entity. If you're going to be the kind of investor who wants to own one $40,000 or $50,000 unit, you probably don't need to worry about creating an entity or an LLC. It depends really on your risk tolerance and how well you want to sleep at night, however, because if you create an entity, the primary reason for creating an entity, and everyone probably knows this, is personal liability protection. So if something happens in that apartment or that house or that condominium, such as a slip and fall or an accident or a fire or something like that, if you have an entity, typically, and I cannot say 100% of the time, but 99.9% of the time, you are protected from any personal action to recover damages for the accident or the fire or the injury. So I guess that's a long way of saying if you're going to have just one entity, and one property rather, in that $40,000 to $50,000 range, you're probably not going to have this great fear of having a personal lawsuit or personal litigation, but it can happen. Now, if you're an investor that, like most of us, and probably everybody on this call, who wants to accumulate real estate as an investment, something to complement investments in stocks, bonds, things like that, or just really to create and grow a company, as I said when I started, 99.9% of the time, I'm going to suggest that, yes, you form an entity for the reasons that I've listed here. So, Zack, do you want me to go into the reasons why it's beneficial to have an entity?
Yeah, I would like you to elaborate a little more on that.
All right. The first and most important one, as I said, is protection from personal liability. When you create an entity, you trade under that entity. In other words, you do all your banking under that entity. Your lease is signed in the name of that entity. You purchase your insurance, liability insurance, property insurance, all in the name of that entity. And what it does is it protects you from, as I said, personal liability and contractual obligations as well. So, for example, if I buy a property, which I did, in my name when I first started, actually I bought 6, all in my name, Matt Owens. And this is before I became sophisticated both on the law and as an investor. I had 6 apartments, and it dawned on me one day that that's a pretty big exposure not to have some sort of a corporate umbrella protection. Having 6, it was 6 buildings, probably I think it was 11 units. That's 11 tenants that have friends over, that cook not in the best way, that sometimes don't pay attention to heating and cooling and how they handle things, don't pay attention to locking their doors. All those things can lead to trouble. All those things can lead to an accident, injury, and damages. And having my name on the property means they're not suing some entity that I didn't create. They're suing Matt Owens, which means all of my personal assets can be exposed to satisfy a judgment or damages that might happen. So even if you're going to be that investor who just wants one property, probably not a bad idea to create, and we'll talk about the different entities in a little bit, but probably not a bad idea just to go with the simplest form, which is an LLC, which will just give you peace of mind and helps you sleep at night knowing that you have some protection against your personal assets.
I think
a couple other reasons. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Okay, a couple other reasons. Clearly, the personal liability protection is the most important. A couple other reasons that are perhaps not as important, but important nonetheless. Credibility with lending institutions. Most people, unless they're independently wealthy, are going to use the bank's money or a lender's money to invest in real estate. I've found over the years that banks typically prefer to deal with an entity. They're still dealing with the individual that comprise the shareholders or the members if it's an LLC, but I've found that banks lend a little more credibility to the person who has created an entity. It shows that you've thought through the process. It shows that you're not reckless and you're not just out there shooting from the hip buying properties. So it gives some credibility to your business plan as a real estate investor with your lending institutions, banks, credit unions, however you wish to go, private funding. Another good reason to have an entity, especially if you have partners, even if it's a husband and wife team or some relatives, or if 3 or 4 friends get together to do it. If you're just buying it in individual names, which you can do, you're not really going to have a governance structure. And by that I mean everybody's not going to kind of have their well-defined role in an operating agreement or the bylaws of a corporation. Operating agreements typically are for the LLCs. So when you formalize it into an entity, each person that's an owner has a very defined, specific governance structure and duties, and it helps the entity run better. That ties into giving yourself some credibility with lenders, too. They like to see that. They know you're serious about it. They know you're organized, and they know that you take your business seriously and you're going to run it properly. The last reason is documentation. When I owned properties just in my own name, I wasn't required to have official meetings. When you form corporations, LLCs, partnerships, the laws of Pennsylvania and certainly other states require that you have formal meetings and you document those meetings. That's important in terms of how you operate and function, especially if you start to accumulate more than 1 or 2 or 3 properties. It helps you with your organization. It helps you remember things that you decided to do. You may have a year-end meeting or a quarter meeting with your business partners, and you're going to record minutes and things like that. And it's going to go in your corporate book. And it's going to be something that you can reference 6, 9, 12, a year and a half later, 6, 9, 12 months later. You'll be able to go back and reference it. It's going to be well documented, well articulated so that you can follow your business plan going forward. Again, it ties in with credibility with banks. The lenders love to see this stuff. Lenders, in my experience over the past 20 years, are more apt to help you with financing if you show you're serious and they see you have a well-defined, organized plan. So there's probably another 4 or 5 reasons, Zack, to create an entity, but I think we've hit on probably the 4 most important.
I think you did. Those were absolutely right on, spot on. Guys, for everyone on the call that maybe owns a property or 2 or 5 that you've bought in your own name, don't freak out. You're okay. We can make things okay for you. But Matt, something you didn't bring up, and I want to bring this up for my listeners because I counsel a lot of people that are doing maybe their first 1, 2, or 3 deals. That nowadays there is residential financing available to the guy that doesn't have many mortgages in his name that is far, far cheaper than any commercial loan ever would be. So I just want to throw one thing out there real quick. If you haven't done a deal yet or have only done 1 or 2, you may want to actually buy your first property or 2 in your own personal name. Once you've got your financing structured and set up, then you can always transfer ownership into an entity. So
that's right, Zach, and that's consistent with what I originally said, that if you're just getting started and you're thinking, hey, I just want to get my feet wet, I'm going to try 1 here, maybe not necessary to go immediately and form an LLC or a corporation or a partnership. I think that's a good point.
Yep, very cool. Okay, Matt, I've got to ask because it's something that I kind of struggle with. I have 48 units now. I've got a couple of LLCs going. I have a lot of stuff going on personally, and I always wonder, and I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd like to ask it for the benefit of the people on the call tonight, and that is you talk about personal protection from liability and creating an LLC to really create that for us as real estate investors. But how thorough is that? I mean, if we create an LLC and we own a property in an LLC and somebody slips down the fire escape and breaks their neck, can they really not come after us because it was owned by the LLC, or will more than likely they try to come after us?
It would be legal malpractice for me to say that it is 100% foolproof, that you are forever protected 100%. There are always loopholes or ways to get around that corporate protection. What it does, Zach, however, is, again, 9 times out of 10, it's going to give you that protection. Damages aren't going to be such that they're going to attach or attack personal assets in most instances anyway. You're going to have insurance in the name of the LLC or the corporation or the partnership, and that may be the subject of another discussion. In terms of how much insurance to have, how much to buy, but you should always be fully insured for liability claims, such as the example you gave, a fall down a fire escape. So I guess to answer your question directly, 9 times out of 10, you are going to be insulated from having your personal assets exposed. If you form the company, that is who gets sued. So if Central PA Real Estate LLC owns an apartment on Pine Street, and that person that you discussed, Zach, falls down the fire escape and goes and gets an attorney, that attorney is not going to be suing any individual. That attorney is going to be suing Central Penn Real Estate, and you're going to have insurance. It keeps the individual out of the litigation. Now, I don't know if you want to get into this now, Zach, but there is such a thing called piercing the corporate veil. Is that for later, Zach, or do you want me to discuss that now?
You know what? Why don't you go ahead? I think it's a good conversation. Go ahead.
And that's the reason I say 9 out of 10 times you're fine. That 1 out of 10, and these aren't exact percentages, obviously. This is just for illustration purposes and discussion purposes. But there's such a thing called piercing the corporate veil. Piercing the corporate veil really comes about from incorporations, INC, Inc. People formed corporations for years with shareholders and things like that, really solely for the reason, when it all first began, to insulate the owners, the shareholders, from personal liability. You sue the corporation. You don't sue the individuals. You can't get at the individuals. It enabled people to do business and sleep at night and not have their personal assets exposed. A concept developed called piercing the corporate veil with corporations, which means in certain circumstances, someone who has a claim against the corporation can pierce that veil. When you have a corporation, you have this imaginary veil around the shareholders, the owners. It's like a protective parachute. And think of claims coming in on top of that parachute and bouncing off because they can't quite get to the owner, the person that's kind of strapped underneath that parachute. You're protected. But sometimes those claims pierce that parachute and do attack or attach to the owner. And the way that happens, there's many, many ways. But probably the most prominent is if you don't truly treat the corporation as a separate entity. In other words, if you and the company become one. So, for example, if you have 3 partners in a real estate venture and you incorporate, so you're an INC, and you don't go through the steps of really setting the corporation up properly, issuing shares of stock, naming officers, president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, having your formal meetings, documenting everything. If you just kind of form a corporation by filing a piece of paper with the Department of State and then say, you know what, I'm not going to do all this other stuff, I don't have time, it costs money, we just want to run our company, you're making yourself susceptible to this piercing the corporate veil because the corporation then is almost a sham. It's like a fraud. You formed it, but you're not really following the law. Not a good thing. And that's a reason why you want to have somebody who knows what they're doing from a legal standpoint. An attorney who can set it up the right way, issue the right documents, and have the corporation on a regular basis. This isn't something that you do, you form it, and you forget about it. There are laws to be followed. There are things that you have to follow up on, and calendar dates every year that you need to meet to have this entity run properly and truly protect you from personal liability. In other words, avoid this piercing of the corporate veil. So there are circumstances where even if you form these companies, if you don't do it right and you don't operate in the right fashion, you're going to be exposed personally anyway. Does that give you enough of an explanation, Zach?
Perfect answer. Yes. Very informative. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's move on to question 2. Question 2 is, what entity options do we as real estate investors have available to us, and really what are the unique attributes of each? And why don't we start with the number one that everyone, it seems to pick, is the LLC.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail right on the head. It's definitely the most popular for owning real estate, especially someone that's going to invest in residential real estate and just kind of get started, kind of get their feet wet. And I don't mean to mislead. You can certainly own 10, 15, 20 properties in one LLC. So here goes. LLCs by far the most popular. Easiest to form. We'll start with formation. There's a couple documents, a docketing statement, and a filing statement that you file with the PA Department of State. Not very complicated or complex. Has to be done right. It's amazing what the Department of State will return if it's not done right, and you end up 6 months out from your desired start date. But from a formation standpoint, LLCs are by far the easiest. In terms of kind of operating the LLC, I would say that they're probably the easiest from an operational standpoint also. When you form the LLC, and if you have a lender in particular, the lender's going to require an operating agreement. That's probably the most complicated thing you'll do in an LLC, and it's not, I don't mean to suggest that it is complicated, it's just the most involved piece of paper or document that you'll create. Operating agreement will explicitly lay out the nature of the business. It will explicitly lay out what each member is responsible for and what each member's ownership percentage or interest is. In an LLC, you don't have shareholders or stockholders. You have members. Under the law in Pennsylvania, they're called members. And again, each member's interest will be spelled out, and each member's responsibilities can be spelled out in that operating agreement. The operating agreement's very important, especially if you have more than one person. If you have more than one person, you're going to have a number of interests that are aligned but that could become competing. I also do business litigation, and I've handled many cases where partners end up in disputes. One person wants to go one direction, another person wants to go another direction. You know, what do we do with the entity? What do we do with the real estate? Who gets what? Who pays off who? It's very important to have that all outlined and spelled out in that operating agreement. Again, relatively easy to form, relatively easy to operate, but that operating agreement, which is done initially, certainly something that you want to pay attention to. Not something you want to do, and I'll take a shot at these legal Zoom companies online. There are people that think, yeah, for $49 I can form a company, and I'm kind of just a little bit of an aside, Zach, if I may.
Yeah.
I almost sometimes welcome people to do that, because when they come to my office and we start to do the work, or we start talking about what it costs and doing it right, I get the question inevitably, well, geez, I can do this online for $250 or $140. I almost welcome that, because probably half of those people, if not 75%, end up back in my office, and then it's 3 times as much to correct the problems that they've created. So I would highly recommend not engaging in that sort of work. So that's a little bit of an aside. I apologize, but from an operational standpoint of an LLC, you have member managed and manager managed, and that's something, Zach, that for purposes of this discussion tonight, it gets a little technical, and I can take calls at the law office later in the week or something like that on that. But pretty simple, pretty easy to operate. From a liability standpoint, by law, you have explicit statutory liability limitations. Piercing the corporate veil, as I told you before, we talked about, it came about with corporations, protecting shareholders. You don't have shareholders in an LLC. Again, you have members. But this whole piercing the corporate veil doctrine is gaining some momentum and popularity with people that have claims against LLCs. So even though you have explicit statutory liability limitations, meaning personal claims can't get to the individual members of the LLC, this corporate veil piercing doctrine is starting to rear its ugly head. So that's kind of it for an LLC.
Matt, are LLCs the newest of the entity choices? I for some reason, I think this like maybe the last 10 years, 15 years?
Yeah, they've been around a little longer than that, but they're by far the most popular, because they're easy, they're not labor intensive, they don't require the formalities on a regular calendar basis that the corporations do and that the partnerships do.
Gotcha.
But again, there's a number of reasons why, and we'll get into that, why a certain individual or a group of individuals that are serious about real estate investing and want to accumulate more than 1 or 2 properties need to consider, and reasons why they would form corporations and reasons why they would form partnerships. So,
cool. Well, let's keep moving then. Option 2 is exactly that, corporation. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yes, absolutely. Corporations, not quite as simple to form. We'll kind of go in the same order we did with LLCs. The formation's a bit more involved, a bit more complicated, and I know everybody's interested in cost, and again, these are questions that I can take directly at the law firm, but if people are interested in that. A lot more involved. Corporations require typically a book. It's called a corporate book. And we maintain that, as a lot of law firms do. We'll maintain that corporate book on site here in the law firm to help people comply with all the corporation laws of the state. You're going to have a number of documents that you need to have prepared when you form a corporation. With an LLC, it's just those quick documents you file with the Department of State and this operating agreement. With the corporation, you're going to issue shares of stock. You're going to have shareholders. So you're going to have to prepare those documents, issue them properly, and have shareholder agreements for the shareholders. You're also going to have bylaws. Bylaws in the corporation are the closest thing to the operational agreement of an LLC. Bylaws are going to be a little bit more involved than an operating agreement and are going to require a whole host of things that might not appear in an operating agreement for an LLC. You're going to have regular meetings that are going to need to be conducted when you have a corporation to comply with the corporation laws. Again, Zach, that's a reason why we maintain those corporate books here in our office, because we put everything on a calendar basis. People that get into this and choose the corporate structure, the INC, the Inc., they want to operate their business. They want to make money, obviously, and they want to buy properties and run their business. They don't want to be bogged down with all the specifics of operating the corporation from a legal standpoint. I love it, but it's what I do for a living. It's boring to the investor, and it's just a nuisance and a bother. So from a formation standpoint, definitely more involved. Definitely takes more time, definitely more expensive. So I guess the first question people have was, well, you know, why would I want to be complicated? Why would I do something involved? Why would I want to form a corporation when I can just do an LLC? Well, the answer is this. If you have a number of investors, you really desire the formality so that it's not quite as informal as an LLC, and you just have a bunch of members, and you know, you kind of say, well, this guy's going to kind of manage this, and this guy's going to do this. With a corporation, it's very well defined. That corporate book, any shareholder can reference that corporate book at any time in the future, pull it out, and everything is well defined. Officers are elected and agreed upon. Shareholder agreements are executed. So if anybody ever has a dispute, a question, an issue, you can always reference those books. You can always reference the meeting minutes that you have on these formal meetings that are required by law. And if you intend to grow and intend to perhaps take on more partners, more shareholders, it's easier in a corporation to do that. You've got the structure for it, and a lot of times my recommendation is it makes more sense if you're really going to take this thing to the next level, especially if you have a number of people that are in your venture. So if it's just you and your wife, and you're going to have, 3, 4, 5, 6 properties, probably don't need to form a corporation. If it's going to be you and your wife and 8 other couples that are in your neighborhood that all got together and say, hey, what a great way to make money, we got to do this, you might want something more formal, because that's a lot of voices to be heard and a lot of issues and things that come up. So it can pay sometimes to have it more formalized and have a very rigid structure. Same thing applies with respect to kind of the operation. I call it the governance. With an LLC, it's very flexible. I don't want to say loosey-goosey, but it's not nearly as formalized as a corporation. As I said before, there's very well-defined roles. Each person has a very well-defined role in terms of, hey, here's what you're going to do, here's what your responsibilities are. And if those responsibilities are abrogated, that can be actionable. That person, depending on the bylaws, can be bought out of the corporation. So you have those kinds of things at work. Liability-wise, which is the third factor for each entity that we're talking about, pretty similar to an LLC. You're going to have that protection from personal liability. Now, you heard me talk about how this piercing the corporate veil doctrine is starting to become popular and a little more used with the LLCs to get at the members. Little stronger in the corporation in terms of the protection of the shareholders. And I'm emphasizing these words because those are the people that own these entities. Again, with LLCs, it's members, and with corporations, it's shareholders because they own shares of stock in the corporation. So the veil, in my opinion, is a bit stronger with the corporation. However, that doctrine of piercing the corporate veil seems to have a little more weight and a little more precedent with the corporation than with the LLC. Okay?
That's great stuff, Matt. I spoke to a client just about a half an hour before this webinar, and her husband are buying a few properties from us, and they spoke to their attorney, and their attorney was leading them down the path of corporation. And after hearing what you just said, it really sounds like, and not to, say her attorney is a bad person by any means or was trying to steer her down the wrong road, but quite honestly, it sounds like she was, like almost maybe that was either her specialty niche or maybe that was a more profitable deal for the attorney. It really sounds like the LLC is probably the way to go for somebody who's only looking to do a few properties.
Yeah, it could be, and I'll add a caveat, Zach, that everybody is different. And as you well know, everybody has a different level of risk tolerance, and everybody has a different level of, I call it, sleepability.
Okay.
You want to be able to operate your business, own the real estate, and you want to obviously be profitable and make money. But you also, quality of life obviously is important, and you want to be able to sleep at night. So, some people, Zach, are more comfortable with the rigidity, with the very formal corporate structure, and having everything well defined, and some people are just very comfortable with that, and it helps them sleep at night. Again, I'm without taking shots at this attorney that we're talking to the client. In their circumstance, maybe it made sense to do a corporation, but I will tell you that, and you know this, Zach, because you said it tonight, the LLC is far more popular to own real estate than a corporation. Far more popular, and it's because of all the reasons we really discussed already by distinguishing between the two so far. So
cool. Let's keep rolling. Number 3 is our last option for discussion for tonight, and that is a partnership.
Partnerships, I've formed many, and people like them for real estate ventures as well. This would probably be one of the least popular that I have done in my law firm, but that is certainly not to suggest that it's not a very viable, beneficial arrangement for two people or more, a group of people, to engage in the business of owning and operating real estate. Partnerships, pretty self-explanatory. You're not members. You're not shareholders. You don't own shares of stock. You simply are partners. And we'll talk about two people. You're essentially a 50% owner. In most cases, you can designate it however you want. Some people that have control issues and are clearly the leader in a partnership will want that extra 1%. So I've seen a lot where, hey, we want to be equal partners, but you know what? I'm kind of the guy that really runs this thing, so I want to own 51%. What's funny is sometimes that's meaningful, sometimes it's not. It's all well defined in what the ownership interests are and what the operational interests are in the partnership agreement. So again, we'll go through the three categories of the entity as we did for LLCs and corporations. In terms of formation, pretty simple document filed with the Department of State. It's called a Certificate of Limited Partnership, if it's a limited partnership. With a general partnership, you really aren't filing too many documents with the Department of State. In terms of the governance, which again I interchange with operation, everything's well defined in the partnership agreement. All partners typically have equal rights in the management of the business unless specifically excluded or carved out in the partnership agreement. So the partnership agreement is very similar to the operating agreement of an LLC, which is somewhat similar to the bylaws of a corporation. Liability becomes a whole different ball game, Zach, in the partnership structure. Okay, there's certainly this we've talked about this corporate veil. There is, and it's a means of immunity. There is immunity in partnerships for limited partners. Okay, very similar to shareholders in a corporation. For general partners, however, full and complete personal liability. Okay? For purposes of our discussion tonight, to get into the differences between limited partners and general partners, we would go off on a 1 to 2 hour tangent. So not something, Zach, that I think we want to spend a lot of time on tonight. You can use your common sense in terms of the definitions just by virtue of the name, limited partner, general partner. Limited partner has limited liability. General partner has full and complete liability. General partners obviously are going to be doing more with respect to the operation of the entity as opposed to limited partners. In terms of liability and that concept of piercing the corporate veil, with general partners, you don't worry about it because they are fully exposed. With limited partners, you do have that protection. However, there is a similar doctrine to corporate veil piercing, which is this participation and control. And it kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier about if you really don't hold yourself out as a separate entity, if you kind of merge and become one with the entity. Now, the good thing is in Pennsylvania, the laws have changed. And again, we're probably going to go off on a tangent that would require another separate hour. But a lot of people want to form these partnerships and entities in Delaware for tax reasons. And I'm not a tax attorney, and I won't give tax advice. I won't give detailed, specific tax advice. We can talk generally about it. But I always recommend that people consult a CPA in terms of any of these entities, Zach, and I wanted to add that caveat as well. But I just want people to be cognizant of the fact that although limited partners, if you form a partnership or you have me or another attorney form a partnership, and your client says, hey, I'm a limited partner, I'm covered, I don't have to worry about my personal assets being exposed. There is a doctrine out there called participation and control, which can lead to your personal assets being exposed. In other words, that limited partnership veil not fully protecting you. So it's just something to be aware of. In Pennsylvania, the laws are favorable to the limited partner in terms of keeping that protection in place. But as always, I don't have a crystal ball, and it's malpractice, legal malpractice for me to say tonight that any of these entities are 100% foolproof. Now, I will give you an example of some limited partnerships that I have formed and the specific reasons for doing that, and general partnerships. And without going into too much detail, it's a tax reason. And there's a tax on LLCs called a capital stock tax. And to my knowledge, at least when I checked last time, the capital stock tax is the highest in the country. It's 10% in Pennsylvania, if we're talking primarily to Pennsylvania investors. The way to get around that capital stock tax is to form a partnership where the LLC becomes the general partner. So the LLC has full liability exposure, but the members of the LLC are protected by that veil in the LLC that we talked about. And then it really applies when you're selling the property, is when the capital stock tax applies. And by forming the partnership and making the general partner the LLC, and assigning only a 1% ownership to that entity, you end up with your capital stock tax at 10% only applying to that 1% ownership interest. Now, that probably sounds complicated, and it's probably not. I don't want to get more detailed than that, Zach, for purposes of this discussion. If people are intrigued by that, it's something that they would want to call me and kind of discuss at another time, and I'm more than willing to do that. I formed that entity for myself in one of my latest commercial ventures, where I built a 26,000 square foot medical office building. And for a whole host of reasons, structuring the deal with this partnership with limited partners and general partners, where myself and my partners were limited, and the LLC was the general, it made sense from the capital stock tax standpoint and from the personal liability protection standpoint by making us limited partners. So I know that's a mouthful. It's probably a lot for people to digest just after hearing it once. A little complicated, requires some thought, and requires certainly some documentation and some legal counsel without question. I wouldn't recommend trying to tackle that on my own, or on your own rather. So limited partnership in terms of formation and operation, I equate to a corporation. I'll come back to this again, Zach, and you said it earlier, and we've repeated ourselves. There's a reason LLCs are used so much, because they are easiest to form and easiest to operate and provide you with that liability protection. So hopefully that touched on the three aspects of partnerships, and I think we've pretty much covered the three entities.
Absolutely. Great explanation. Good stuff, Matt. Let's move on to a few questions that I seem to be getting as of late almost weekly. The first one is, how many properties should you put into each entity and why? Is it one property per entity? Can you group them together? What are your thoughts in regards to that?
Absolutely. Zach, you can, just from a pure technical standpoint, you can put as many properties into a single entity as your heart desires. I don't recommend that. And I don't recommend that for a number of reasons. And again, I have the battle scars that that demonstrate why not to do this. But we won't go into details. Again, I'm more than happy to discuss that with people individually and privately. But if you find yourself having 10 properties in one LLC, you've afforded yourself that personal liability protection. But what you've done is exposed your entire portfolio to a claim from an injured person or a person with contractual damages because you didn't pay a bill or something. And now you've exposed your portfolio. You're still protected because you have that corporate veil. You have that company formed, and the real estate is owned in that company name as opposed to your name individually. But if you've got all those properties in that one company, and in my example, you have 10 properties, one person slips and falls down the stairs and, God forbid, becomes a quadriplegic. Well, that could be $1 million or a multi-million-dollar claim. Your insurance might not be adequate, and that one property where that person fell might not be adequate to liquidate it or pay some damages. So you've now exposed your entire portfolio to satisfy a judgment or damages in a case or a claim like that. So I counsel my clients, and I started on my own with my commercial, and at the tail end of the residential I started to do this as well. I started forming a new company for each property. I will say that it's a little more acute when you're talking about a $3 or $4 million, $25,000 commercial building to form a separate entity for each one. It's a little more acute than if you own 3 or 4 $75,000 townhouses. A little bit more acute because you're going to have bigger exposure with the bigger commercial properties. People see deep pockets, things like that. Your claims tend to be larger, tend to be bigger. Contractual damages tend to be a lot bigger if you have a problem with a big commercial property as opposed to a single residential property. So my recommendation is, if an investor is going to have 2 or 3 properties, again, it's everybody's tolerance level. If you want to do belt and suspenders, you being the property investor, the real estate investor, form a separate company for each and every property. You'll never have that cross liability, or I can't say never, you should not in most cases have that cross liability exposure that you do if you put them all into one. Now, if you're going to buy 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 properties, I highly recommend that you start having separate entities for that cross-liability reason, because now you're getting into some true exposure, and it's just not smart business to expose your entire portfolio when you get that lawsuit or that claim against the company that owns all those properties. Another reason that I've found it beneficial to have separate companies is really for ease of bookkeeping. Now, somebody might scratch their head and say, well, what do you mean? You only need to do one return for one entity, one tax return. You only need to have one set of books for one entity. You would be amazed when you get into the 20 and 30 units, and Zach, I'm sure you found this to be true, how things get mixed up, how books get mixed up, how numbers get mixed up, how your accountant is ready to throw you off the nearest building because you're not giving him nice, neat zip drives with individual data on each property. It happens. Nobody's immune to it. When you have separate entities, it keeps you, I've found personally, and I've counseled clients from a legal standpoint, and it keeps you perfect, basically. It keeps everything perfectly organized. It keeps everything separated. And it's easier for your return and to see performance even, just if you're studying your portfolio. It's easier, in my opinion, to monitor each property as a single investment and a single company by forming individual companies for each property, rather than having 20 or 30 all in one. And I'll be honest with you, I think banks, your lenders, the people that you have to rely on to help you in this business, are going to love the fact that you have separate entities and are going to appreciate how organized your business is, especially when you get into the 5 and 6 and 7 and 10 properties, by having these separate entities. So probably the two biggest reasons to form new entities for each property. This is not to say, Zach, that someone cannot own 10 properties in one LLC and be very successful. Absolutely, I am not saying that tonight. But what I'm giving are just I've experienced it personally as a real estate investor in both residential and commercial. And I've counseled my clients from a legal standpoint, more for the cross-liability reason than the organizational standpoint. But I've counseled them to form separate entities. So it depends on the individual, no question about it.
I think that is great. One of my early mentors gave me advice, and he was in Southern California, so price points of homes were a lot larger than they are here in Harrisburg. But his advice was never put more than $250,000 worth of real estate in one separate entity and to spread your risk that way. So in his market, that was probably one deal. In my market, it may be 5 or 4 deals. So what are your thoughts?
That's right. That's an excellent point, and that's an excellent consideration. The concern of the focus there, Zach, is not the number of properties, but the amount of money, and that makes a lot of sense. That's a good analysis. I like that.
Cool. Let me ask you a question. Me, personally, I have not done a new LLC for every one of my properties. I think it's great advice, and it's given me something to think about. I have several LLCs, but not each individual property. But if someone were to take your advice and do a new LLC for every new acquisition, is there anything wrong with naming that LLC simply the property address?
Absolutely not. In fact, that's probably one of the more popular things to do.
Okay.
No question about it. But you can name it anything you want. It's funny, but everybody's unique, everybody's an individual, and people come up with some really interesting names. People don't think about this, but you don't want somebody writing their monthly rent check to a company with 7 names.
Right.
And it's amazing how people don't think about that until after. They think of their long lost cousin who had a really cool name, and then they bring in the family crest, and it gets crazy. And people say, well, I'm proud of my family and my heritage, and I want the company to be named after all this, Braveheart and all that wonderful stuff. They fail to realize that you're going to be filling documents out for as long as you're a real estate investor on that entity forever. And boy, it's nice to have a real short, quick name like a property address or even an acronym with just some, initials, A, B, C, corporation, or ABC, LLC, or something like that.
Exactly.
Good point.
Cool. I think we've covered the next one, but let me just clarify. So for the new investor just starting out, or really just for any investor, I think we've determined that for most people, a standard LLC is going to be the best choice. Is that an accurate statement?
I would agree with that, Zach.
Okay. We've covered that, corporate veil. Let's cover this one in just a second, Matt. We have a lot of people on the call tonight, and I actually have some really what I consider to be pretty good questions. So I'm going to ask just a few of these if you're okay with this, and these are all just come in. Steve, how's it going? Steve, haven't talked to you in a while, asks, went to a real estate seminar last week, and they were promoting land trusts under an LLC. Good, bad, or indifferent is the question.
I'm really indifferent to that, and this is one of those questions that depends on the personalities involved in the business. People create trusts for a whole number of reasons. There's a lot of tax considerations for that, and there's also liability reasons to create trusts. For purposes of this seminar, Zach, I will tell you that it is very rare for me to recommend these land trusts. It can get a little complicated. It's quite involved, and it costs more. But again, I'm not saying it's not a good idea. But it's really, in my opinion, it's really not necessary for the guy like you or me who isn't concerned with trust issues in terms of creating a formal trust to own real estate. It's just not something that I do on a regular basis or recommend to the clients that come to me to form these entities to own real estate. Now, I know they're out there. I know there's seminars about them, and I've had clients ask me to do them. But it's not something that I am going to recommend on a regular basis. I hope that answers you. And if there's, we could go off on a tangent on land trusts and why we create trusts, and really it differs state by state too. But if we're talking Pennsylvania, we could have a whole separate hour discussion on that as well. For my purposes and for the clientele, I think, Zach, that you have people that want to start out and get into real estate, own 1, 2, 3, or 10 units. Unless that client comes to me and says, I specifically want to do a trust and put it in combination with an LLC, I'm not having my clients get involved in the trust. So,
cool. Okay, Maura wants to know how much liability insurance should you get?
That's a great question. You can, in my opinion, you can never be insured enough. From a liability standpoint, I would never, ever have liability insurance under $1 million. Even though you are buying investment property in what we call the residential market. In other words, I'm assuming we're talking to somebody that's buying apartments, residential.
Yeah, or houses.
Yeah, houses, residential tenants versus commercial tenants.
Yes.
Never would I have less than $1 million in coverage. $1 million, you can sleep at night. It's going to cover pretty much any damage claim that's going to come down the line. It's a risk tolerance thing. And insurance, to be quite honest with you, Zach and Maura, is not that expensive. You can go up in increments of $500,000 or $1 million, and it's just not that crazy. I'm a guy who is way overinsured from a liability standpoint. Now, I'm sure that stems from the fact that I've been doing litigation for 20 years. and I've seen, both sides, and I've seen what lawsuits can do, and people can truly be devastated by that. But for somebody who has one residential apartment or townhouse or one house that they're renting to one person or a family, certainly $1 million probably is pretty standard. I would never go under that. That's just
Do
me,
you have
though.
an
It's a
idea?
risk tolerance thing.
I haven't checked our insurance premiums lately. Do you have any idea what $1 million would cost?
That's going to vary from company to company.
Ballpark?
But what I do know, Zach, and I can say with certainty, is that to go from $1 million to $2 million for liability insurance, I'm not talking about
Right.
Destruction by fire.
Right.
That can get expensive.
Right.
And a lot of agents won't allow you to insure it for 3 times the value, as you guys probably all well know. But
Right.
for liability insurance, for people falling or making claims, electrical fires or electrocution, that kind of thing, to go from $1 million to $2 million is just spend the money. It is not that significant. I'm going to say you can get a good $1 million liability policy in the $1,000 range, which for a year, I mean, gosh, that's less than $100 a month. So
right. I actually think, I know a lot of our clients use our guy Steve Swineford with Christian Baker. I think he's like half that. So I'm not saying, and you and I could both be wrong. Maybe you're high, maybe I'm low, but
yeah, sure,
I honestly think it might even be half that. Maura actually had a follow-up question, and you're definitely going to be biased. I have my thoughts on this, and I want you to answer very honestly. She wants to know what you think about prepaid legal. Sorry.
Tough question to answer on the telephone, and I certainly don't want to get sued by prepaid legal for any disparaging comments, and I'm not making disparaging comments. I'm thinking carefully, Zach, about how to answer this.
I gotcha.
My preference is, and 100% of my clients simply come to me because they were referred by somebody or they know me personally, and that's the relationship that I establish. And they're going to get a quality legal product from an experienced practitioner. I have some experience with prepaid legal, but I don't have a lot of clients that engage in that. So without saying anything directly attributable to prepaid legal, it's worked for some people. There's no question. Some people love it.
Cool.
It helps. But there's.
I think it's all
you're
about.
You're limited, Zach, to lawyers, I believe, that subscribe to that when you have prepaid legal. So you pay some fee to belong, and then boom, you get sued. And prepaid legal sends you, I believe, at least this was my experience, to lawyers that participate in that program. And you save some legal fees and things like that. But, gosh, don't you want to really be able to kind of select your own attorney, somebody you know, somebody that you have some experience with, somebody that's been recommended to you? That's where most of my clients come from.
You do. I think that, if I've done anything right in my business career, it's been forging fabulous relationships with great people, you being one of them. And a good relationship with a good person is invaluable. Me personally, I mean, you've been my attorney for years. The conversations you and I have, the discussions we have been worth a multiple of every penny I've ever spent with you. So, cool. Let's keep moving. Gary Brown asks, Gary, how's it going, by the way? What will the costs be to transfer the properties we have already bought personally into an LLC that we established after the purchase of the property? So he owns properties. He bought them in his own name. He now wants to transfer them into LLCs. What's it going to cost him? I don't even think he's asking price to create the LLC. We'll get to that. But he's, I think, asking the other incidentals like transfer tax.
Well, and therein lies the problem. And that's something that I found myself facing after I accumulated my first 10 or 11 residential properties. I woke up one day and said, geez, I don't want these in my name anymore. Unfortunately, at that time, this 1% transfer tax was rearing its ugly head. So for me to transfer even though it was from myself personally to an entity that I was a member or a shareholder of, and the sole member and sole shareholder of, one person, I was still getting whacked with these transfer taxes. Now, there are ways around that today, but it's not foolproof. And I'm not going to go on record here by saying that if everybody is, all of a sudden wants to get these properties out of their own individual name and into entities for this personal liability protection. I'm not saying that it's 100% excluded from transfer taxes, but there are exceptions in the tax code, and that's something that you definitely would want to consult a CPA on. In my situation, because situations are different, will I be facing a 1 or 2% transfer tax, even though I'm taking it from my own name into an entity that I'm the only owner? And again, back at the time when I was considering doing this, I was definitely advised by the state that I was paying transfer tax by the Department of Revenue. So,
and I think that is exactly the case today. I think it's 1% of the assessed value of the property.
Right.
Which, Gary, I know what you own. In a lot of those cases, it'll be reasonable. It's not going to be, thousands and thousands of dollars. And I would say this to everyone that is in that situation. I own properties personally that maybe I should transfer into an LLC. There's a reason and an argument to be made to buy personally when you're just getting started. And this goes back to the type of financing you're going to be entitled to. Today, buying a property personally, you can get a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at 4.25% out of the gate. You will not get that buying in 123 Main Street LLC. You will go commercial. The rate will be 6 to 6.5. It'll be a 20-year loan, and it'll be a 5-year lock. So there's arguments to be made to buy personally, get your financing structured, and then transfer ownership into an entity after the fact. So that is a strategy that you guys can talk to your attorney about or Matt about. And Gary, I think that is the situation you're in, and it's doable. You can do it. I can tell you it is. You're going to pay 1% transfer tax on assessed value.
That's exactly right, Zach. And if I can follow that up, you said this earlier. I'm going to echo your comment earlier. Don't panic. If people own 2, 3, 4, 5 properties in their individual names, don't panic. I didn't panic back when I had 10 or 11. I was facing a transfer tax of $100,000 or something crazy like that. So it was just not going to happen. So what did I do? And this will be consistent with my statement 5 minutes ago. I bought more insurance. I couldn't get the benefit of having an entity to give me that personal insulation from liability, so I just bought more insurance. And it was a much cheaper alternative than jamming everything into an LLC. Now, if you're for $5,000, if you can get all your properties into an LLC, or for $1,000 or $2,500, then you got to put these things on a scale. More insurance costs this. Doing this now so I can sleep at night because of my personal experiences or personal beliefs and feelings on this. Yeah, the cost might not be that bad. So you put those things on a scale, and each person needs to kind of weigh those things and decide. So, but again, in my situation, I was facing a transfer tax of over $100,000, and it was just simply not doable at that stage in my life. So,
wow.
Yeah, I bought more insurance, and that Zach, that taught me to because that gave me peace of mind at that time, and that I've carried that philosophy for 15 years now, and that's why I buy lots and lots of liability insurance.
Cool. Okay, Sergio, how's it going, buddy? Has a great question. It's a two-part question, he says. 1, if you have it written in the lease that the tenant is responsible for their own injuries, how can they come after the owner? And 2, if you purchase properties in your own name and purchase a large amount of liability insurance, how is this not as secure as the corporate veil of, say, an LLC?
All right, first question is if you put it in the lease. And I'm talking about Pennsylvania law now. But you cannot preclude somebody from suing you for your own negligence. So those clauses, while neat and while they look real good and kind of give you maybe a little sense of security, it's a false security. I can assure you that if you have that in your lease, that you're responsible for your own injuries, and your tenant is cooking, and somehow the stovetop malfunctions, and crazy scenario, the burner comes loose and catches a lady's bathrobe on fire, and she's burned. Your clause in your lease that says you're responsible for your own injuries, it's not going to insulate you from liability. What's going to happen is you're going to get sued. You're going to have an attorney. And one of your defenses may be, hey, look what I have in my lease. But you're going to have an attorney that represents, in my example, this lady who was horrifically burned, who's going to say, wait a second. You can't insulate and preclude yourself from negligence on your part. And the negligence on your part as the property owner would be, you didn't maintain your kitchen, you didn't maintain your stove in a safe condition. So that clause isn't really worth the paper that it's written on. So, I'm not counseling everyone or saying unequivocally don't include it. But if you've committed a negligent act and your tenant is injured as a result of that, you are getting sued. You will get sued. And that clause will not protect you from a lawsuit and ultimately from a judgment or damages that are awarded to that person. So that answers Part A. Part B was how, if you've purchased in your own name and have a lot of insurance, how is that not the same as having an entity to protect you?
Of, say, an LLC.
An LLC, yeah, or any entity for that matter. You could fit anyone to that question, substitute. That's a good question. It is essentially the same. However, even if you have $1 million in insurance or $2 million or $3 million in insurance, nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows what type of injury or what type of claim could come down the road. And in that case, it's not the same, because depending on how much insurance you have, if you get one of those outlandish, crazy claims that's worth $5 million, a lot of people don't carry $5 million in liability coverage on their properties. If you don't have an entity, your personal assets are exposed. So you may have, I'll give you an example. You have a 3-unit apartment building, and the top tenant will go back to the cooking scenario. We'll build on that example, Zach. Woman, a fire started while she's cooking. The stove malfunctions, or the stove wasn't maintained. The burner pops off, sets the building on fire. Unfortunately, you've got a 3-unit building in my example here that we're building on. You could have 3 families injured from fire. If your building's attached, if you're in a city or it's a building attached to other commercial properties and they burn down, you could have other personal injury claims, and you could have property claims. Not hard to imagine where damages in a case like that could easily exceed $2, $3, $4, $5 million. Very few people carry that much liability insurance. If you do not have an entity, all those people, meaning the people with personal injuries, all those people that own those properties that were destroyed by fire caused by the negligence in maintaining the stove, they're all coming after you. And they all want their damages satisfied. And if they can't satisfy them with your insurance, even if you have a lot of it, they're going to try and satisfy their damages with your personal assets. Does that answer that, Zach?
Absolutely. Great answer. Okay, next question is from Neil. How's it going, Neil? Look forward to our appointment next week. Neil asks, if I have acquired a property in my personal name and have an existing LLC, what is the process for putting that property under that LLC?
You're going to have, well, if there's financing in place, and we didn't talk about this yet until this point, so that's a good question. Financing in place, your lender is going to want to participate in that process. The lender's loaned money to you personally. Now the lender has the collateral for the loan being transferred into an LLC or an entity. Yeah, some lenders don't care. Some won't let you do it at all unless you pay some consideration. And some will have a different angle or approach and may have some other instruction for you or some other limitation for you to be able to do that. So certainly you're going to want to check with your lender if there's financing in place. You're going to be transferring it, Zach, so that 1% transfer tax is going to hit because now the owner's not you individually, it's an entity. In terms of an LLC and putting the entity into that LLC, you're going to simply have a lawyer draw up or draft some resolution or some document that's going to transfer that officially into that LLC. It's pretty informal. It's pretty flexible in terms of what document will do that. But not that complicated, not that involved. The biggest hurdles are going to be the lender and the transfer tax. Otherwise, not that difficult to do. You have to change the formal name of the entity. You're going to have to change the asset list. You're going to have to update the operating agreement to the LLC because now the LLC owns a new asset. And so that's going to have to be put in there, and then you're going to have to update your insurance as well because the insurance on the property is going to be in your personal name. Now the insurable interest is in the name of the company, so you're going to want to have to change that as well. So there's some things you got to do and some things that you probably wouldn't normally think about if you don't do it on a regular basis, but it's certainly not insurmountable.
Perfect. Okay, we'll keep moving along here. A few more questions. Gary asks, I am considering, and I'm not sure if you're going to know this one, Matt, because I definitely don't. I am considering establishing a solo 401k to buy real estate, and I read that it is a good idea to establish an LLC owned by the solo 401k to buy real estate for asset protection. Is this necessary?
Is it necessary? Absolutely not. And if I understand the question correctly, is it necessary to do this for asset protection? No, it's not. We talked about a whole slew of things that we can do for personal asset protection. This is similar to the trust question, and this is certainly something that I would recommend and I do recommend to my clients that want to do this, that they consult a CPA first. To talk about all the financial issues surrounding it and certainly the tax issues. So not something, Zach, that I'm prepared to get involved in for purposes of our discussion tonight. That's something that when I have a client with a question like that, we kind of do a roundtable with an accountant. Is there a reason to do it? Yes. Is it a very specific reason? And by that I mean situational? Yeah. It's not going to apply to the generic investor that I think this seminar is meant to talk about. So.
Yep, absolutely. And guys, I can tell you, working with Matt for years and years and years, every single weird situation I've had come up, whether it was us trying to franchise an idea or buying a building or rezoning or something. If Matt couldn't answer it, he had a colleague that could. He brought him in. We collaborated, and we got to the best solution. So, Matt, if he can't answer it, his team of professionals can. Neil asks another question. What type of insurance should be carried for the LLC and each individual property? I guess liability insurance for the LLC.
Right. I'm confused by that question, Zach, I must admit.
Okay.
What type of insurance should be purchased for the LLC and the individual property?
Yes.
Well, I don't think you're going to differentiate. In other words, there's really only going to be one insurance policy. I don't think you're going to have two separate policies. In other words, if ABC Realty LLC owns the property, you're going to purchase liability insurance in the name of ABC LLC.
Okay.
Does that answer? Am I misunderstanding that question? Because I'm a little confused.
Dale, if you want to clarify it, if you throw it in the questions there, we'll come back to it. Let's keep rolling, just because I know we're gonna be ending here soon to try to get everyone off at 8:30, and there's still like 2 or 3 good questions.
Sure.
Bob asks, how's it going, Bob? Good to see you. Is there such a thing as a personal corporation, also a family trust, and would these provide any personal liability protection?
Zack, we're going to get into the same thing with the trust
yep.
and the 401k.
Yep.
Yes, those concepts exist, and those concepts can provide different levels of protection. They are so situationally specific that I can't generically talk about it in a setting like this.
Fair enough.
We would have to have an exact set of factors and circumstances. You know, a family of 5 children. You know, is the person independently wealthy? Do they own other companies? Do they have other business interests? What kind of assets do they have? It's just almost impossible for me to talk about it in a generic form. If Bob wants to contact me or any of the people with these very specific individual questions, you know, I can address them personally.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, Mike is asking, how's it going, Mike? Mike asks, what type of personal assets can be in danger in case of a lawsuit?
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say anything and everything. Certainly your personal home. To the extent you own automobiles, those are exposed. Those are the 2 biggest assets that anybody really ever owns, and they're the 2 biggest assets that creditors or people with damage claims or judgments against you go after first. So if you own things individually, your home's absolutely exposed. However, if you own something in just your name and your home's owned by you and your spouse, typically, keyword, joint assets aren't going to be exposed in that kind of situation, depending on how the ownership interests are structured, who's on the deed, that kind of thing. But really, any and all personal assets are exposed. So if you have somebody injured in your property with $1 million claim and you're carrying $300,000 in liability insurance, the insurance is going to be gone. That person's going to be paid the $300,000. Now they have $700,000 in unsatisfied damages. They can attack any asset with equity or value that you have. You know, if homes and cars are the first. After that, other business interests. Certainly other business interests that are held individually by the person against whom the judgment has been entered or will be entered. Do you understand what I mean by that, Zack? If you have business interests with 7 other partners, those other partners aren't really exposed to a claim brought against the one guy who owns this one piece of real estate where somebody was injured. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And that's what I meant by that. So, you know, again, really all your personal assets, to the extent they're held individually in the name of the person that the judgment would be brought against or the damage claim would be brought against, are exposed.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that is going to do it for this evening, guys. I'm going to give you a way to contact Matt. What Matt and I have done is we've worked together for a number of years on all types of really cool things. And I convinced Matt to do something that he does not do for anybody else, at least that I know of, or that he's told me about. And that is we've put together, and PA Deals is deriving 0 revenue from this, just as in full disclosure. But to help you guys out, I know there's some people on the call that need an LLC or want an LLC now or in the future. And here's what Matt's willing to do. He will create a customized LLC for you for $1,000. That is all inclusive of everything that will be required to create that LLC. It includes a custom, meaningful operating agreement. That's the biggest difference with, you know, these LegalZoom companies and and maybe some other law firms out there that are just following, doing a find and replace with boilerplate documents. This is going to be a custom LLC, $1,000. You're also going to get to consult with Matt and put it all together with him and his team. If you are interested in that, you can simply give him a call as soon as possible at 717-909-2500. That is his law office's phone number. Leave a message or speak with his assistant. Just let them know that you were on the PA Deals webinar. You're calling to set up an set up an LLC, or to even speak with him, for a little bit as a consultation call, and he'll get right back to you and make it happen. And I just wanted to close tonight's call, Matt, with just one simple question, and one that I think is so important for people out there that are listening this evening that are maybe on the fence, or maybe they've done one deal and are considering doing another. And I just want you to share your honest opinion about real estate investing in general, what it's done for you, what you think it will ultimately do for you, and what it can do for others, and why right now is an unprecedented time to invest in real estate.
Absolutely, Zach. My OCD, by the way, mandates that I say this in response to that very last question. Personal security holdings can be exposed too. We talked about homes and cars, but your investments can be exposed, not necessarily 401ks and retirement funds, but securities too. So I would not feel right if I didn't explain that, because some people might not understand that. So I apologize, but I had to get that one in there for everybody.
Yep, no problem.
Real estate, well, let me put it this way. You would think that a partner in a large law firm would be happy or satisfied just doing that. And it was, and I love practicing law. I really do. It's my passion. I knew I always wanted to do it, and it's a wonderful profession. I still enjoy it. I love talking to people, and I love helping people from a legal standpoint. Real estate has really kind of helped me go to a kind of another level in terms of professional and personal success. And without seeming like I'm patting myself on the back, I never envisioned that I would be in a position to own 500,000 square feet of commercial office space. I never really envisioned that I would own 100 residential units with various partners and individually. I absolutely love it. I have never talked to another human being who's asked me questions about my career and choices I've made. I've never, ever told another human being anything other than invest in real estate. And that holds true even after what we all experienced in 2007 with the downturn and the collapse of the real estate market. I owned commercial properties. I experienced some vacancy in that time. I sold some assets. Even though those things occurred, it is still the greatest thing in the world. It is the greatest way, in my opinion, to accumulate wealth, to enable you to do all kinds of other things that perhaps your main profession won't let you do. My partner and I have gone to levels that we never thought would be possible, and it all began by owning a couple apartments. Everything really has built from there and kind of put us into a whole other level in terms of our business and our operations and things like that. And I talked about, Zach, how we weathered the storm through 07, 08, 09, and how I still love it and still recommend it. That situation has created a current environment where investing in real estate and be it residential or commercial, but even particularly residential, where prices are compressed and interest rates, because the feds want to keep the economy pumping, so they keep the rates low. Interest rates are historically low, as everyone well knows. It is a wonderful time to invest in real estate. And Zach, I know you have every caveat in the book, and as a speaker and participant tonight, I have to add the caveat. that there's no guarantee. Who knows what will happen. But, I weathered that horrible 07, 08 storm and still love it, still recommend it. I bought 2 buildings 2 months ago, considering another building this month, and will continue to go. I've owned 20 townhouse developments. It's just a wonderful thing, and I love it. What more can I say? It's a great time to get in. It's done nothing but positive things for me from a professional standpoint and certainly from a personal standpoint. So I hope that's enough of a description for how I feel, Zach.
It is. And, Matt, the only reason I asked is a lot of the people on the call tonight, they have done deals, and maybe they said, wow, am I doing the right thing? Is this for the right move? They've got their financial advisor and planners saying, no, invest in the stock market.
Yeah.
And I live it. I breathe it. I'm fully invested in real estate. I love it. It's changed my life. I am creating wealth with every payment I send to the bank. I'm owning another piece of my assets. And I just love for other people who have lived it and who are living it like yourself. And you're doing it on a totally, totally next level than any of us are. But you started where we were at. And,
that's right.
And you don't have to be on Matt's level to reap the rewards. I tell people, if my mom, when my mom and dad bought their house that I grew up in, when they bought that, if they would have just bought just one more, they'd have been $250,000 richer today.
Right.
And that, if you just buy one house, 2 houses, 3 houses, it can have some profound effects on your long-term wealth creation over the course of time. So you and I talked the other day. Everyone on the call will probably get a kick out of this. You're buying, not to put it out there, but you're buying stuff that actually has a negative cash flow because there's so many other benefits involved, right?
Absolutely.
Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, absolutely. That's accurate. Sure.
Yeah.
There was a time when you could buy office buildings or apartment complexes or townhouse developments that were 100% leased. Now, because of the values being compressed and interest rates being so low, you can get, and because of all the other advantages, you can get into these properties when they're 75% leased, when they're 50% leased, because, there's just tremendous upside opportunity. Tremendous. When you, and I'm, I'm not rendering financial advice here. Everybody knows that. I'm just talking about my own personal experience. But, I owned WorldCom stock. I owned Exo Communications stock. When those companies go belly up, you have a piece of paper, and on it says value 0. When you own an apartment building or a house or a condominium or a townhouse and real estate depresses a bit, you still own the bricks and mortar, and it's really a kind of a wonderful thing. So that's kind of my own little spin on this whole thing.
Yep, I think that's awesome. There was one final question, and I'm going to answer it, and the question was, after they pay the $1,000 to have the LLC created, are there any ongoing fees or monthly fees? The answer is absolutely not. There are no memberships. It's really this simple, guys. Almost everyone on the call, there's like over 40 people on the call tonight. You're all my friends. We know each other. We do business together. If you need an LLC, Matt's a good friend of mine. He'll do it for $1,000, and he'll do it better than anyone out there, in my opinion, will do it for, or will do it better than anyone out there. And it's $1,000. It's done. She asked how long is the LLC good for? It's good for life.
That's right.
So
that's right.
There you go, guys. Matt, you were awesome. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for attending tonight's call. If you have any questions for me, give me a shout tomorrow or call Matt, 909-2500, and he'll be more than happy to help you with anything you need. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you, Zach.
You got it. Take care. Bye.